This is Baruch here. I'm at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel, and we have the discussion right now. Let me see if I can just whip this over here where you could see it. The Jews of Spain on the eve of the expulsion in the 15th century. So we're talking about approximately 500 to 600 years ago. Not that long ago in Jewish history, but very, very momentous. Now, what they say about Spain is that Spain is a cut-up country, a country with lots of different parts, so that it's difficult to unite it. I mean, if you want to put Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, and a few other things out there in the West, Midwest, the Dakotas, it's easy to see how you can put them together. Everything's flat until you get to the mountains. But over here in Spain, and with valleys and mountains and rivers that are going different directions and not particularly functional, you have a cut-up problem. So here is Castile, in Spanish Castilla. So in Castile, that's a major center of where Fernando and Isabella will be setting up shop as the other kingdom, which is on the other side, a very long kingdom, which is today called Barcelona. This area right here, Valencia and Catalonia, all of that is part of the kingdom of Aragon. And there were other kingdoms, and over a course of time were constant wars. Wars of Christianity, wars of the spread of Catholic rule. And as a result, you have some Jews in between. Now, in the background to this, and maybe he's going to get to it, but 100 years before the expulsion, there was a tremendous pogrom in Spain, 1391, which, for example, somebody gave me a lead that maybe some of my family came from a place called Gueta. Just because it's similar to a name that bounces around in my family a little bit. And so I looked up Gueta, which today is called Huete. And so I looked it up. In the year 1390, there were 100,000 Jews there. Let's say, or 20,000 Jews. I don't remember the number exactly. In 1392, there were none left. What happened to them? Well, they were offered the sword or conversion. So the Jews of Spain had lived through the Almohads. They lived through times when they had to pretend that they were something else, assuming that things would change. But what happened is that once they were forcibly converted, they took it upon themselves to really hide their Judaism. They were still Jews, same people, same Jews. They just had a different label on them. But the church had an army and a police state. They were very, very concerned about these people lapsing into a Jewish identity. The competition between the church and the small group of Jews, which actually wasn't probably so small in Spain. The conflict between those two was exasperated by the fact that many, maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews had been first forcibly converted, and now they're considered to be, in the language of Spanish, Conversos. They're people that are converted. They're Jews on the inside, but on the outside, they wear a cross. So that is a whole theme that's going to come around at this time. We'll try to see what is really playing. So the Jews of Spain on the eve of the expulsion. Let me see. This is a big book, so it's a little bit hard to handle. Okay, the expulsion of Spanish Jews in 1492. Now, let me see if I can carefully just extend this down a little bit. Needs a little bit more extension or a little more movement. Okay, we're okay. The expulsion of Spanish Jews in 1492 had its roots in the persecutions of the year 1391. Now, at that time, they wanted to destroy all the Jews in Spain. Didn't get to that point, and the Jews were able to buy themselves 100 years of non-persecution. So one of the things that Rabbi Beryl Wein points out is that the Inquisition, which we're about to hear about, it was never directed at Jews. It was directed at these people who are called Conversos. So what happened then, when a large Jewish population of about 200,000 was forcibly converted and continued to live alongside both the surviving Jewish community, to which they no longer belonged, and the Christian community, which had not accepted them. Now, in this, we're reading Dr. Chaim Beinart, and he has this 2-volume set on the Spanish the Spanish legacy, it's called. And he goes through tremendous detail of how this situation developed. And we're going to get a lot of it right here. The apostates, the people Pablo de Santa Maria in Castilla, formerly Solomon Halevi, Rabbi Burgos, and Jeronimo de Santa Fe, formerly the doctor Joshua or Yoshua Halorki of Alcañiz, became prominent figures within the Christian community, both working actively against their former co-religionists, each in his own way inducing the authorities to convert the remaining Jewish population. They wanted everybody to become Catholic, which of course is the idea. I've heard that the word Catholic, the definition of it means universal, so the idea here is that everybody should be subsumed in the religion of Jesus. Upon the advice of Jeronimo, the antipope Benedict XIII in 1413 convened a religious disputation in Tortosa, inviting 12 rabbis from the Kingdom of Aragon to participate. The disputation, which continued for about 2 years between 1413 and 1414, caused considerable stress among the Aragonese community, bereft of the rabbis and leaders who were struggling with the apostates in Tortosa. So in other words, the rabbis had to leave to spend time in Tortosa, where they could be involved in this dispute. So this is a dispute. So this is like a show, a fancy show trial. So he says, these years were characterized by much apostasy. In other words, there was no strength in the community, no one to leave the communities. So many people converted, which was part of the idea. The Dominican Father Vincent Ferrer traveled from place to place, preaching conversion and exerting pressure on the Jewish population. Only at the beginning of the 1430s, so this is a long time to live through, could signs of recuperation be discerned among the communities of Castilla, particularly in their attempt to establish a nationwide Jewish organization with a code of regulations. In 1432, Abraham Benveniste of Soria, Rab de la Corte, he was called the Rab de la Corte, the rabbi of the convened representatives of the Castilian Jewish community in order to reestablish the Jewish judicial and educational systems, determines methods of tax collection, combat informers, and establish norms for a more modest lifestyle in Jewish society. Now, who are these informers? What are they reforming about? Unlike those of Castilla, the large Jewish communities in Aragon, which is, once again, you could think of Catalonia, or more likely, especially if you're a football fan, soccer fan, you talk about Barcelona, Barci, were not revived after the persecutions of 1399. The large Jewish communities of Aragon were not revived after the persecutions of 1391. And in the 1430s, the Jewish communities in the Balearic Islands, which is like Mallorca and like that, ceased to exist. Now, I have met many people from Cuban backgrounds who said their families came from Mallorca and the Canarias. They call it Canarias. I'm not sure which islands are which. And they still, 600 years later, know that they have Jewish roots. But that's it. They don't know anything about it at all. So the riots against the Conversos in the year 1449 in Toledo and Ciudad Real must be viewed against the background of an antagonistic Christian society, unwilling to accept the new Christians, and that's the problem. Two problems. I meant to say that earlier. This is that the Gentiles knew the difference, obviously, between what was an old Christian and a new Christian. They didn't want to have anything to do with the new Christians and their descendants. The instigator of the riots in Toledo was Pedro Sarmiento, appointed by King John II of Castilla as commander of the fortress. Now, let me see if what I can do here. I need to be very sensitive moving this thing around. Sometimes it stops the video. So he says, unlike those of Castilla, the large Jewish communities in Aragon were not revived. He said that. We're down here. He said, accept the new Christians as their descendants, The instigator of the riots in Toledo was Pedro Sarmiento, appointed by King John II of Castilla as commander of the fortress. A heavy war tax imposed on the city, to be collected by the Converso tax farmers, served as the pretext for the riots, which were directed against the Conversos and did not affect the Jews. Now understand what he just said. First of all, tax farming is like this: is the king needs 100,000 pesos or whatever, and so he has people that are appointed. They're called tax farmers. They give him the 100,000, and they go out in the community and they collect money. Over here, they had converted Jews, who are called Conversos, doing the tax farming. And this started riots against the Conversos because they become the intermediary between the money needed by the king, because there are wars going on all over, especially from Castilla, incorporating all the surrounding areas. Goes on, he says, riots occurred again against the Conversos in Toledo in 1467, and in the towns of Andalusia from 1473 to 1474. Now that is against people who had accepted, maybe were forced to accept Christianity. So you just imagine how this is if you're living in a Jewish home in a Jewish neighborhood like the one I live in now. And now policemen are appointed on every corner, and basically they're coming over to check if you have a crucifix or a mezuzah in your house. If you have mezuzahs in your house, it's a problem, and especially because you are supposed to be a Christian. So that stopped real quickly, because people who made these mistakes and did not try to hide this as much as possible were in tremendous trouble. The status of the Conversos in the intensely religious environment of a militant Christian state, striving for religious unification, became the subject of considerable polemic literature. The disputes between those favoring integration and those opposing it gave rise to anti-Jewish as well as anti-Converso literature. Alfonso de Spina, a Franciscan friar, published a major work around 1460 in which he argued that the continued observance of Mosaic law by the Conversos, in other words, people went to shul secretly, resulted from their contact with Jews and could be remedied only by the expulsion of the Jews. So here's the thought right away of the expulsion. Get the Jews out, make everybody universally Catholic. Alfonso was also the principal originator of the idea of the national Spanish Inquisition. This is, as said previously, was always directed at the Conversos. The ascent of Fernando and Isabella to the throne of Castilla in 1474, and the United Kings of Castilla and Aragon, where royalty married royalty, and they started working together and became one. In 1479, raised hopes for a respite among the Jews. In 1474, the Converso request to settle in Gibraltar on a promise of fidelity to Christianity was rejected out of hand by Fernando and Isabella. The Catholic monarchs conceived, well, let me turn this page here, conceived the plan for the organization of the United Kingdom to be implemented in stages, stabilizing their rule by creating a calm atmosphere and preventing revolts of the nobles and the townspeople. Now, this is what it's like to rule in Spain at this time. Establishing a national Spanish Inquisition to deal with the problem of Converso fidelity to Christianity. That is why the Inquisition began. And you should know that many Jews tried to escape. So Columbus himself, this great man, was a Converso. And the people on his boat, by and large, were Conversos also. Maybe they knew a little bit about Judaism, maybe they knew a lot, I don't know. But the Inquisition followed them. It eventually followed them to Mexico, where there was an Inquisition in Mexico, because once again, you could understand why Conversos might want to come back to Judaism if they could get away from this. It occurred in Peru, it occurred in Brazil, the Portuguese Conquistadors, and other places in Latin America. It's a terrible, terrible thing of the Inquisition. We'll get to that. The verse fidelity to Christianity, the conquest of Granada, the last Muslim foothold in Western Europe, and the expulsion of the Jews. By these methods, they intended to create a united Christian kingdom of Castilla and Aragon, of one flock and one sword. The crown's first step in 1475-76 was to quell the revolt of the Marquis of Villena that supported the union of Portugal and Castile through the marriage of Crown Prince Juana, daughter of Henry IV of Castile, to Alfonso V of Kingdom Portugal. Fernando and Isabella then turned to deal with the Jewish heresies of the Conversos. So these different fights, as I said before, Spain is a place which is very difficult, was very difficult. I don't know now. Did Franco put them together? I don't know. It's been a very difficult place to put together. And here in fanatical Christianity, that's where they're going to do it. In 1477, they appealed to Pope Sixtus IV for permission to establish a national inquisition in Spain, which was granted in 1478 and 1482. Two Dominican monks, Miguel de Morillo and Juan de San Martin, were appointed as the first inquisitors. They're fun guys. They began their activities on 1 January 1481 in Seville for the whole of Andalusia and Spain. In 1482, an expulsion order was issued against all Jews of Andalusia, giving them 1 month to leave. During that time, the Dominican Tomas, now this is a famous name, the Torquemada, was appointed Inquisitor General of the Spanish Kingdom. And it was he who was responsible for the Andalusian and other expulsions. Saragossa and Albarracin in 1486. The latter, postponed at the request of Fernando, did not take place until the general expulsion took place 6 years later in 1492. Inquisition tribunals were systematically established throughout Spain. During the war against Granada, the Jewish communities of Castilla were heavily taxed, the amounts increasing each year. On 25 November 1491, this is 1 year before the expulsion, 1490 Granada, which was the last Muslim foothold in the Iberian Peninsula at the very bottom down here. I think you could see it on this map, and we'll get to that. He says, established throughout Spain, where are we here? In Granada, the last Muslim foothold in the Iberian Peninsula capitulated on 6 January. The Catholic monarchs entered the city in a, I'm reading over here without showing it, let's say, the Catholic monarchs entered the city in a triumphal procession, and on 31 March, the year 1492, they signed the edict of expulsion of the Jews from the whole of Spain. Now they had the whole of Spain. The edict specifically stated that the reason for the act was religious, namely, so long as Jews continued to reside in Spain, there would be no hope for the integration of the Conversos with Christianity. There is no doubt that the ideas embodied in the edict were those of Torquemada, who based his anti-Jewish ideology on the writing of Alfonso de Espina, the beginning. Now, I think we're going to stop and we're going to make a second shir, and we'll try to get them out on separate days and get an idea what's going on in these maps.